Hi, good evening and welcome to Tertulia. This is an exquisite Tertulia because rarely do I get to trade blows, share, and ask and be asked by a fellow visual artist with whom I find I have shared several places in common, several places that we have been. Please welcome Quintín Rivera Toro. ¿Cómo estás, Quintín?
Muy bien, thanks for having me, Miguel. It's an honor to be here.
We would like to do this in Spanish, but we also want to include so many people, so we're going to be doing it in English with heavily accented Spanish. Quintín, before we start, talking, I would like to just to let some folks know that might not know you already that Quintín was Harks from Caguas in Puerto Rico. He has a BFA in sculpture from Hunter College. I taught at Hunter. I went to Hunter for my MFA. And he's also studied at the University of Puerto Rico in Río Piedras. He's got an MFA from RISD, from the Rhode Island School of Design. And he recently did a PhD in Valencia, Spain. So other than that, I mean, it's a flurry. It's exhibitions here in New York, exhibitions in San Juan. He was the co-founder of ÁREA in Caguas, which is a seminal space, alternative space in Puerto Rico, which is not so alternative anymore. It's a force of nature. And Quintín is coming with an exhibition to the Clemente Soto Vélez, and that's opening shortly on Friday, the 28th. So please come join us. That's going to be one of those first openings, kind of in this interregnum of pandemic, dare we say post-pandemic. Anyway, Quintín, were there any artists in your family growing up?
Okay, well, I have to say yes. My mother, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, they were very skilled painters. Well, my mother's still alive, so she is very passionate. She enjoys, actually, I'm often pointing out the fact that she's a lot more disciplined than I am as an artist. She's regularly drawing and painting and getting educated, further educated. So yeah, I mean, the vein is there, the sensibility is there. It's a family thing. But I guess I was the first one to sort of like launch into it as a career, or maybe, I've gone back and forth with calling it a career, that sort of has an implication of like monetary, capitalizing on, but that's often not been the case. So sometimes I call it an art practice, So I've certainly since I moved to New York back in 1998, I then decided that I wanted to be an artist. I used to be a dancer in my teenage years. But as soon as I got into my first few classes at the Broadway Dance Center, I was like, holy shit, these people are really awesome. This is not me. I need to do something else. And then I had the privilege of studying with a gentleman called Robert Swain at Hunter College, who one day said, hey, you should consider being a painter. And I was like, okay, I like it. I like painting. So ever since, I've pursued an art career.
Robert Bob Swain is one of the most gifted pedagogues, teachers that Hunter College Art Department has ever had. His passion for illuminating color theory in a very lucid way is nonpareil. So I have my kudos here also to Bob Swain and his incredible pedagogy in color and such. Anyway, but so going back to that, so you've got it from the cradle, your mother's there, it's in the bloodstream, you're seeing her draw, I suppose from early age. So is there a particular experience or a work of art from, from your formative years in Puerto Rico that you can comment on or tell us about?
I mean, if I were to dig into my bag of memories, I have to say that some of the earliest impressions that I had to be Rafael Tufino's humongous painting at the Centro de Bellas Artes.
Okay.
I actually, the title of the work is escaping me right now, but it's
I
it's
think it's
basically
La Plena. It's all these plenas, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah.
And so the towering scale, the narrative forms, the dexterity and the figure and the expressiveness and the intertwined history was certainly something that I thought was like above and beyond anything I'd seen before. So I'll quote him, you know.
Wow. And then, you know, we're going to talk at length about so many things, but I'm very impressed with your academic credentials. I can see that you're an artist that's constantly engaging academia in and out, producing from inside, and then criticizing from the outside, or critiquing rather from the outside. I see the BFA at Hunter, 2001. So you came to Hunter, dealt with Bob Swain before you actually got your BA from the University of Puerto Rico in cinema and comunicazione. Then Rhode Island in 2013, you know, your master's, you know, at RISD. And finally, this doctorate in Spain, in Valencia, Universidad Polytechnica. Talk to me a little, I mean, everything else, these are great, sorry about that. These are great spaces, but I'm very curious about the doctorate. You know, it used to be that our MFA was the terminal degree. So what is this thing with the doctorate, and how do you feel, or should I say, Dr. Rivera Toro, how do you feel, Dr. Rivera Toro, about being a doctor in visual arts?
Yeah. Oh, well, that's a great subject for me to like jump into. You know, let me start with this joke. You know, if you feel ill, I can recommend you a book. You know,
Right.
I mean, being called a doctor as an artist is almost, you know, it's almost ridiculous, right?
Obscene.
It's obscene. I like off the book. La Tea is rocking. But basically, there's always been a strong interest and respect for academia in my family, mostly because of the fact that we didn't have a general in-depth education. So I was actually talking to my mother this morning about it. Like, one of the reasons why, for me, it's a motivation to be an art professor or a professor of anything is the fact that my father holds it in a very high esteem. He didn't finish his bachelor's. He came from a very, you know, a poor working class family. So as soon as he hit his first year of the university, he went out and got a job in the construction field and just decided to keep on working. My mother does have a bachelor's in psychology, although she always wanted to be an artist. She confesses in recent years. But my sister is also a doctor in psychology, and so there's like basically like a synergy that has informed our family values, you know. And so I think that's always sort of something that I want to strive for. Just because of social cultural values in my own family. Nevertheless, I love the classroom. Like, I think the classroom is one of the, well, I mean, these days it's a highly politicized and complicated place to be. But, you know, over the last 20 years, I have felt that the classroom is probably the most creative space that I could have engaged in. It's collective brainstorming. It's you know, it's eating and digesting and regurgitating, you know, history and theories, and so I've always enjoyed the environment of the classroom and academia. But basically, as soon as I started teaching at the University of Puerto Rico, after finishing my MFA, my then boss, Fernando Paez, started insisting that I needed to get my PhD because now the stakes are higher, right? Academia demands that professors have the highest level of education possible. And so I went for it. I mean, in Puerto Rico, the economy has sort of been in the shambles for about 15 years now. So we kind of had a lot of free time in our hands. I decided to pursue this degree in a university which is so incredibly affordable, which is the antonym of my experience with my MFA. I mean, I have $130,000 in debt from the Rhode Island School of Design, and I don't regret it because I basically became alphabetized in many technical and also, theoretical ways of understanding art making. But in contrast, my PhD, like literally I paid 150 euro per semester. So it was like 300 euro a year. So that way, of course, we want to go to school, it's not a burden. It's actually something that, that was very affordable and very possible. And so nowadays, PhD programs, remote PhD programs are self-directed. So basically, I made my own schedule. I basically, needed to comply with 600 hours of art production and then writing a book, writing a thesis, which is one of the most mammoth things I've ever done in my life. But I'm very grateful for the experience because, yes, I am a doctor in contemporary art history in Puerto Rico, and I feel I have become, a master of certain aspects of our history. And so, yeah, I very proudly will take the doctor, although I don't really use it,
Well, let's segue from that to the exhibition here, even though I want to go more into your practice per se. But I know that the exhibition that you're going to be bringing here to the Clemente Soto Vela Center, to the Abrazo Interno Gallery, it's called Arte Puertorriqueño de Resistencia en el siglo XXI. Puerto Rican Art of Resistance in the 21st Century would be my approximate translation. And that's the same title as your thesis, as your doctoral thesis. So are we getting, in essence, some of the core ideas illuminated by contemporary practitioners from Puerto Rico? Is that what arriving at the Abrazo Interno Gallery this Friday, or next Friday, rather?
Yep, that is precisely what's going on. So basically, it's a group show of 10 contemporary Puerto Rican artists. I will briefly mention their names. They're Marisol Plard, Miritza Castillo, Mónica Rodríguez Medina, Garvin Sierra, Carlo Ibarra, Dani Rivera Cruz, Jamsi Leslie, and Colectivo de La Puerta Collective, which is an anonymous collective. It's a cool thing to talk about too. But yeah, it's a group show of all the artists that I investigated for my thesis. And so it's a very intense group of artists. They are all, from their own point of view, demonstrating that we experience a continuous oppression of all forms: economic, military, ideological, patriarchy. Like, to be a Puerto Rican in Puerto Rico implies that you're swimming against the current constantly. And I'm not saying that in other cultures, in other countries, this is not, also an experience. But what I argue in my thesis is that it is an inescapable form of art making, to make art of resistance. Mostly because of the fact that, as Omi Baba would put it, is one of the theorists that I used in my thesis, we live in a form of mimetism. We're constantly mimicking the oppressor. We're constantly finding ways to try to feel, not achieve, yet feel that we have the loftiness of our oppressor, which in fact will never be possible. So what ends up happening is that we have a kind of psychological distortion where we are, although living in fear constantly, and there are very simple ways to prove that Puerto Ricans live in fear, even if they're not aware of the fact that they live in fear, because we get used to it. We find ways to escape this immediate oppression and reality through, dreaming and wanting to look like our oppressors. In this case, the United States of America, but for a previous 400 years, it was the experience with Spain. So yeah, all these artists are finding, some of them with humor, some of them with like straight on confrontation, and some of them dealing with gender issues, some of them dealing with, it's a big gamut of possibilities. So I really hope people can come visit the show. It'll run from the 28th of May until the 26th of June. So please come visit.
So the flames in the title, Cultura en Flama, I guess they're more of a destructive or something that holds us back rather than a passionate sort of like effluvium or renaissance. So the flames are kind of eating at us, right? In your perspective?
Well, I mean, I actually welcome the two possible readings of flames, signifying passion. But yes, as I originally intended it, was the idea that there's a continuous destruction. I mean, in my prologue for the thesis, I write about the idea that it is a house that is burning, but it just never stops burning up. It's just constantly under attack. There's never a ceasing of the fire. So yeah, a culture in flames refers to that experience of feeling threatened and yeah. So that's basically it.
No, and then but then you do have, and I'm going to quote you also from your thesis, that in spite of all these difficulties from an adverse environment that is sort of applied to us within the confines of the island, you also say that there's a phenomenon of some artists, which I presume are the colleagues that we're excitedly expecting here at the Clemente, these colleagues that are enjoying their best moment. And that even though there is a new obscure period, existentially obscure or whatever, they continue their artistic production within a golden age for the history for art history in the island. So you also are very hopeful, or you're looking at this opposition, as it were, as a great sort of, spur to produce art, or at least in the case of these artists, it has worked as a spur, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also very glad you bring that up, because so I also argue in the thesis that because of this stress that we are existing under, we have as this need to dream up new possibilities, these micro-utopian possibilities. We make some of our best work under the fire of the oppression. I argue at some point that when Puerto Rico was experiencing a sort of an economic bonanza, artwork became sort of boring. It was about market value. It was about, aesthetics over content. And so now that we are, removed from that bonanza for a good decade and a half, soon to be 2 decades, we are certainly needing to come up with other methodologies to point to our experience. I mean, the best that an artist can aspire to is to represent their experience. I mean, of course, that is my point of view, and I think other people share it as well. Artists strive to make a depiction, a photograph of their current moment in history. And so if we're going through hard times, that is what becomes represented in the artwork.
Right. No, the snapshot has definitely, the snapshot is ever evolving of what the artists represent. And in the case of New York, for example, runs parallel to what you said, because a lot of people go back to, the 70s were rough, they were horrible, but the artwork was a lot more motivating or real, or had gravitas. And then a lot of people decried the art of the 80s as banal, something very technically driven, but totally airheaded. So I think here it's been the opposite. We went from airheadedness, I mean, in your thesis, and I certainly agree to it. you know, to something that now has a lot more, you know, conceptual acumen, or at least fervor, because of the hardships. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, but we want to, I mean, I want to also now come bear down specifically on you and your trajectory as an artist, because as a you know, as a person that wears several hats, and you're curating and you're stepping forward and promoting colleagues and other artists, sometimes, not that this is happening to you, I can see by your CV, sometimes our own work gets lost, right? Or that focus. And I want to bring that focus back to you and your evolution within this 15 years of hardship, with that other side of the coin of, well, now I can really talk. I don't have to go fine-tuning stuff, and I can really bring stuff. Let's talk about, like Bob Swain would have said, let's talk about your subjectivity. What is your subjectivity? Where are you? What's a big thing for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful question as well. I think I have needed, through the years of my art practice, to move around constantly. I mean, recently I became comfortable with the idea of calling myself a postmodern artist, because of the fact that postmodernism pretty much signifies the idea that we're having information come from so many different sources, and the only thing we can really do is funnel it, you know? And if we are this filter, you know, if this body and this mind is the filter for having all this information coming from all these different sources, especially now with social media, which is, you know, it has crazy effects on your concentration. So I can only like expect that I am also all over the place, you know? So go ahead.
And how does that affect the output? Because I also I see you've done murals. I can see your sculpture output, and I know you did sculpture, the MFA. So that's where I was thinking, oh, he's more on the sculpture side. But then I see this gorgeous photographs. I see the curatorial, the writing, you know, the thing. So would there be a medium that you, without confining yourself, is there a medium that you gravitate to, like your, you know, default mode?
Yeah. Well, you know what? In very recent times, I've tried to make peace with this, you know, all overness. And if I were to today, if I'm going to officially pick two different media, which is also kind of avoiding the question in some way, I'll say woodworking. This is something that I mean, since I was a child, in Puerto Rico, there has always been a lot of construction, which, by the way, is one of the most amazing, effective ways to laundry money through the corruption of our government. You know, it's just building things that will never get used. But so I saw a lot of like construction work, and I was always amazed by the use of wood for the function of, you know, casting and mold making, columns, walls, and, you know, las formaletas, you know, this was something that it's an early childhood memory. But then when I got into RISD, I started learning what fine woodworking was. And this blew my mind. And ever since then, it's just been like an insatiable hunger to learn more, especially now that you know, since I've been back to Puerto Rico. We have so many amazing wood species that are difficult to find in many other places of the world because of the climate. Natural conditions in Puerto Rico are very diverse, are very generous. And so nature produces some of the most beautiful exotic trees. So woodworking has definitely become a specific interest that I hope to continue to hone as I get older, and which, by the way, I think we're going to touch upon this later, but there's a show of some of my woodworks at Governor's Island right now in the NADA Art Fair.
Oh my God, yeah, no, I think you should tell people right now, because so you're here for the show at the Clemente, but is it simultaneous? Are you going to do something at Governor's Island as well that people that we could all go to? What's the date at Governor's Island?
Absolutely. And so I will just so briefly say that the second thing I'm interested in is filmmaking. I feel my heart is in filmmaking. Like I've been preparing all my life to become a filmmaker, but we'll talk about that later. So at the NADA Art Fair, the opening weekend was, I believe, last weekend or 2 weekends ago. And I believe it'll continue up until late April. I'm sorry, that couldn't be right. April has already passed.
Yes.
And sorry, my artistic dyslexia is. So we'll have to find those dates because I actually, as I understand it, it'll be a long-running show. But basically, I've started working with Sawara Alejandro. It's a local gallerist here in Puerto Rico. It's a very respected, awesome, fellow artist and now gallerist. And so we were able to. We applied. It's a selection-based thing. It's very competitive, and so we were lucky to have gotten into. We have like a little cloakroom. I've never visited myself. I hope to have a chance to visit while in New York. But I believe there are all these sort of Victorian wood houses that became vacated. And now as artists always with creative solutions, they basically took over all the different rooms. And so, yeah, I have seven art sculptures. 2 of them are sort of functional. One's a bench, one's a tabletop, and the other ones are just abstractions. But the concept behind Salvanomia, which is the title of the show, it's a made-up word of salvation, and Dasonomy, which is the study of the forests. Basically, I always like remembering the fact that there's a very famous Saint Peter sculpture by Michelangelo that devout people would like caress its foot as a way of prayer and say thank you and say please and say I wish and all these things. I'm not a very religious person, but I always love the idea of just having like a talisman or a shrine or something that holds like, especially in times of need, and we've undergone so much shit in Puerto Rico over the last, 5 years. Like the hurricane was, like crazy devastating. We had earthquakes, which is very, very uncommon in the island. And of course, the pandemic and everything else. And then the general elections,
Yeah.
But anyway, so I've made these sculptures that are sort of supposed to be interacted with, a bench that you can sit with and a tabletop that you can eat on. And so basically they have these inscriptions that say, this almond tree will save our country. Or, or this Paduk table will save our country. So it's a form of prayer, it's a form of conceptual, sort of signifying a matter, an object, sculpture. So yeah, that's what's going on over there now. We were lucky enough to get a mention in the Times, in the New York Times.
Congratulations, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, I remember Professor Katie Siegel making us at Hunter College, making us read the New York Times art column. And
The Friday Times?
Yeah, exactly. And then me thinking, oh my God, that person, Roberta Smith, she's a mean person. She can really like destroy people, And so anyway, so the fact that this was mentioned by Roberta Smith was like, oh my God, we got lucky.
That's amazing. That's a very nice, like touch that you have that mention that's tangible. What was I going to ask you? Well, I don't want to, I don't want to delay this filmmaker thing because, as you know, now besides my own practice as a visual artist, I am directing a theater, and we've been filming a lot during pandemic. And the theater has become a haven for filmmakers, Latino filmmakers of all sorts. So we're very steeped in the travails of, making film from the trenches, no budgets, stealing shots in the street, continuity issues, all sorts of stuff. Talk to me about this yearning, and I see that you've done something already. Talk to me about the filmmaking direction and how do you see that panning out?
Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. As you may very well describe, it's a very guerrilla style of filmmaking. For about a decade, I was very interested in video art. While I was in Hunter College, I was gravitating towards ultra minimal aesthetics and installations. But then the more I learned about art history and what was going on, the more I realized, hey, I'm not really making any contributions here. Like, if Fred Sandback nailed it with string installations, like, what the heck am I doing with string sculptures, you know? So basically, I went out and bought a video camera, and ever since then, I started this relationship with audiovisual media. Of course, watching films, which is, you know, a general right for any citizen of the world. Observing films has long been an incredible enjoyment and intellectual stimulation for me. But I never had I'll just say it openly, I never had the guts to jump into it. I mean, filmmaking is incredibly complex. It requires intense collaboration, trusting, finding, you know, people that are really good at their craft, and in the end, it's incredibly expensive. So the fact that I had a lot of experience as a video artist and like super do-it-yourself one-person band kind of, you know, strategy, I came to a point where I understood that because I've navigated so many different, you know, ways of making creatively, that meaning, you know, painting and writing and, you know, photography, you know, all the components that you kind of need to be familiarized to be a good director. I realized that, you know, without really knowing, I've been getting prepared, you know, to actually be able to fulfill a role. I mean, as the director, which, you know, it might be very glamorous, but in the end, it's just one of the many roles of making a film. So during the pandemic, I had a lot of free time in my hands, and I decided to take a film workshop. And one of these workshops with La Maestra Raiza Bonet, we needed to turn in a short film. And I just could not describe the happiness, the enjoyment, the thrill that I experienced in that one day of directing. You know, the fact that I could, that actors could somehow be an extension of my ideas, and you know, like if you were to say to somebody, like, you know, it's sort of like a choreographer too, you know, which and I have had experience in dancing, so to tell an actor, I need you to fall harder, I need you to jump higher, I need you to, you know, look more anguished, you know, things like such. The enjoyment that I experienced and the multi-dimensional elements, the pre-production, the logistics, you know, that kind of reminds me of making public art, you know, like all the logistics of, like, you know, for this time, at this time, we need this tool, we need this thing. And so I got bit by the bug, and then immediately I needed to make my next short film, and it's in the can. Like, I'm editing right now. I'm getting ready for my third short film, because in the end, I don't know if I'll be able to, like, you know, play that game of like the big distributions and things like that. So I'm gonna recur to what I can, which is my idea is that I'm gonna make 4 short films and present it in a gallery. You know, it'll be like a chronological sequence of narratives, and it's very much made as traditional filmmaking is. But you know, I'll just make it the way that I can and that I need.
So is it going to be more Matthew Barney or Julian Schnabel? Where are we going?
Well, listen, okay, I thought about Julian Schnabel when you mentioned the big 80s, you know? Like, I remember, like, looking at his paintings and being like, this is a humongous piece of shit. Like, this is a very tall piece of shit. Like, how how could anybody pay $2 million for broken plates? Of course, I was 18 years old. I didn't have much education then. But anyway.
What about his films? But I really like Julian Schnabel's film work. I've been very impressed since he started with Basquiat, you know, like the one about Reinaldo Arenas. The sensibility is really powerful. What do you think about his movies?
So my joke is, I hope to have been a terrible painter so I could be a great filmmaker, just like Julian Schnabel. I mean, before Night Falls and Les Papillons, Les Scaphandres, you know, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. I mean, I will say hands down, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly is my favorite movie. Like, if I were to die and be like, pick a movie, which is impossible, of course. Like, you have to pick 100 movies. I mean, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, as a male, as a parent, you know, as somebody who's interested in, you know, and who has dreamt about the grandeur of you know, whatever the art world, I could not identify more with that character. Like I said, I've read the book, I've watched the movie like 24 times. So I think Julian Schnabel is amazing. Like I'm the biggest fan of his films. And no, but Matthew Barney, I don't know. That's a different conversation.
Bueno, what else? I also wanted to, we were talking a little bit about Hunter, and since we brought up, you know, Bob, I wanted to ask you, did you take classes with someone that's been very committed to Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans, to painting, to pushing the envelope, and that's Juan Sanchez. Did you work with him or under him over at Hunter, or no?
Professor Juan Sanchez. I mean, that's one of the biggest conundrums in my experience as a student. I visited him in his office many times, but interestingly enough, I felt that because I came from the languages, the plastic visual languages that he himself, you know, manifested in his paintings, I was like, I already know that. I need to learn other things that I do not know. Nice. And so I never got into one of his classes, and I regret it. Because he was a sweet man, you know, very full of knowledge.
What about Valerie Jordan? Was she still there, Valerie Jordan? Did you take her by any chance?
Valerie Jordan was there, but she was not available to undergraduate students. She was only MFA. And so was Robert Morris.
I was going to ask about Robert Morris as well. Okay.
I would have liked to have studied under either of them. But nevertheless, I did. I mean, I studied with amazing people like Anthony Panzera, basically, who was, you know, sort of like the Lone Ranger of like academic.
Figuration, the Lone Ranger of figuration. Yes, absolutely.
You know, he was instrumental for me to lose a lot of insecurities about my lack of knowledge in terms of figure drawing. You know, so I always tell my students, I took his class 7 times in a row. Like I took figure drawing, I took advanced figure drawing, I took independent study, and then I just continued to like jump in his classroom unsolicited, you know. And so, yeah, many important people in my heart from those days.
Well, I think also, I mean, having gone through Hunter, albeit the MFA, you know, it starts to sink in after a while. What a prestigious and amazing faculty, a program. There's some Motherwell there. He was involved. I mean, so many New York art luminaries went through Hunter and taught at Hunter. I pulled a 15-year stint there teaching foundation, and it was a great pride, you know, in my CV and being able to stay with it. So I think you had a great BFA in that sense, because they have some powerful dudes and you know, like.
I had the privilege to study with Nari Ward.
Yes, I know also of him. I didn't take him. I don't know that he was there when I was in, but he came right afterwards. But yeah. Anyway, getting beyond Hunter, and a little bit, since you mentioned that it's been during this pandemic year that you sort of obtained your own permission to do film, a little bit more time. So let's talk a little bit, other than the filmmaking aspect, which you already discussed, about the pandemic year. Because, you know, when I talk to my sister, who's a scholar, you probably know her, Mercedes Trelles, you know, tells me, Miguel, we had the bankruptcy, then we had the political, you know, like shenanigans of getting some people out of there. Then we had the earthquakes, or either or first, and then now this, you know. So, and we were noticing the difference in dealing with pandemic strictures. Puerto Rico at the beginning was really careful. People were really following. And I think it was the sense of, we've been through the treadmill. We know what a crisis, given Maria's, you know, impact, what it's like. So pandemic, Puerto Rico, what up?
I mean, to be honest, my point of view is that Puerto Ricans have continued to be extremely careful. And I like your theory. It's certainly because we have undergone a lot of like continuous crises. And so it's like, you know, no nos han quitado el guante la cara, you know, like we have the glove in our face the whole time, you know. Nevertheless, because of our colonial relationship, we have had very little control over, for example, our borders. Those are questions that are left unanswered. Like, how come we have continued to be the receivers of cruise ships? How have we continued to be the receivers of international tourism? Like, why have we not been able to take control over any of this? And the answer, you know, the unspoken answer is that because we don't control anything in our country. We're basically mere puppets for economic capital interest from abroad. And so you know, in conjunction to the fact that we have alarmist, you know, news sources that are continuously feeding us fear. It's not really based on facts. It's based on a lot of subjective sort of, you know, narrations. So, you know, science hasn't really been hand in hand with our precautions. It's mostly been sort of like street smart. You know, I think that we've had very little problems with, you know, wearing our mask and staying in our homes and things like that. But as complicated as things may be, you know, and of course, me being an artist with sort of alternative thinking all the time, you know, I have a lot of doubts, as everybody does, you know, but I have a lot of doubts on what is actually going on. Like all of a sudden, like, you know, it used to be that, you know, there were no testing and there were no vaccines. And now it's like you can go to the corner store and get vaccinated. And this is all, and you know, I'm trying to make a joke about the fact that it is incredibly accessible. You can get whatever vaccine in whatever doctor's office and whatever pharmacy, Walgreens, CVS. It's like chairs are lining up so that everybody will get vaccinated. And the weird thing is, like, where's the tab? You know, all these vaccines are at no cost whatsoever. It's like, that can't be. All this medical equipment is expensive. You know, like, who's paying for this? And the only answer I can come up with is the taxpayer. I'm paying for it. And somehow, I mean, I had COVID. I had COVID. I got infected with it. You know, my experience was, you know, in no way comparable to the flu. I remember I got the flu while in New York. That was incredibly painful and, you know, and difficult. And I was at the prime of my youth. But anyway, I'm not, I wouldn't call myself an anti-vaxxer, but I am definitely like anti-capitalism. I think that we're managing things from the point of view of the accumulation of big pharma. You know, it's not really about the people. And so, like, when is this going to ever change? And so I'll go back to my thesis. We're a culture in flames. Like, Puerto Rico has always been, you know, like I mean, this is kind of like a difficult image that keeps coming back in my mind. It's as if you're watching somebody that you love get raped. you know, and you can do nothing about it. You just have to sit there and watch. You know, it gets broadcasted every day, you know, in the news, in social media, on the newspapers. We're just basically watching our country get raped. And we have nothing, no power, no decisional power over anything. And it's extremely disempowering and frustrating and everything else that you can come up with. So what do? We make art, you know? We find a way to like keep having hope. We find a way to keep dreaming up new possibilities. And so, yeah, so anyway, that's my experience of the pandemic. I'm sorry if I got a little too heavy there.
No. I'm very interested, and I'm also thinking that about another thing that I read about you. You know how they said the pen is mightier than the sword. So here we are making art, or you know, reacting and affecting change, and certainly some of those feelings are very much the tenor of the times here in the United States and in other countries as well. What is just not as common as that availability of vaccines is that now that you're saying that, it almost sounds like I get nervous, like insulting, because there's places where there's a total dearth of vaccines. So here we're seeing also, you know, a huge contradiction. What you're talking about is almost like an embarrassment of riches, even though I know there's a subtext and another potential for, you know, for mischief, if you will. But currently it's an embarrassment of riches, and that's probably part of the colonial relationship too. So I mean, everything is very convoluted in my own mind. I'm not, you know, I'm not questioning what you've brought up, because I sincerely agree with a lot of it, maybe not all of it. But I wanted to say that if the pen is mightier than the sword, you have mentioned at some point that you also, in that polyphacetic, you know, multi-genre practice of yours, that you were contemplating a gazette or a publication or something. And let me tell you something, here in New York, I find that for all the brave efforts of El Diario La Prensa, we don't have a cultural, I mean, you think about all these Colombians, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Cuba, a lot of people go through New York, are artists, and a lot of us live here and go back and forth or spend long stays, you know, or study. And we don't have a magazine, like an art magazine, like a newspaper, even with a solid, you know, byline for reviews, you know, for all the Mexicans and the Salvadorans and the Guatemalans and everybody that's here, because there might be more Argentinians, or who knows what's the number. We know, I mean, Dominican first, Puerto Rico and Dominican hand in hand, and then Mexico, blah, blah, blah. So is this something that you're galvanized about, or this is something more back burner, or would it be based in San Juan, or it's off the table right now?
Well, in terms of writing, I've contributed in the past. There was a very interesting project that I actually wish to pick up at some point. I haven't had the time, but I used to write monthly columns for a digital newspaper at the Universidad Ana Méndez, a newspaper called Cruce, so cross path. And I titled it Unmasculinities, okay? So there were columns based on the experience of being a hetero male, which in itself is a polemic subject, because of course, as we all know, privilege has always accompanied in a very unfavorable way, you know, for white hetero male, which is exactly what I am. Nevertheless, being solidary with feminism and having a daughter, which I wish to, you know, make things better for her future here in Puerto Rico, and you know, things like such, having a partner, having a mother, etc. I am very much a feminist solidary person, but through a lot of psychoanalysis, which I am a big fan of, I always advise people to not indulge, that's actually not the word, to embrace psychotherapy, which is, you know, like, you need vegetables to be healthy, You need exercise for your body to be okay, and you need psychotherapy for your heart and mind and conscious to be okay. So, I've come to understand that in order to offset the inequities of gender biases, us white males who hold the privilege need to question how it is that this privilege is constructed, okay? So it can't just be, you're a machista, you're a macharran, you need to shut the hell up and stop. That's only on the surface. We have shut the hell up. We have stopped. We have had to re-examine our ways. But why are these ways there? What exists behind the psychological infrastructure for us to continue to perpetuate these inequities? So, that's sort of the theoretical sort of briefing of these columns that I used to write. But basically, starting from a narrative autobiographical point of view, I start deconstructing why it is that I have made the decisions, that I have made. What makes me a vulnerable person? What makes me be angry instead of crying? What makes me ache and ail and all these different ways of feeling vulnerability that as males we have been denied, culturally have been denied to be in touch with our feelings, to share man-to-man vulnerability, to identify with with the fear that a female body experiences. It is not our experience to go out on the street and feel fear. Well, what if we did? What if all of a sudden walking into the street would mean that somebody will point out to you, listen, you macharrang, you go back to your home right now. You're not wanted here. And this is happening. In Puerto Rico, this is manifesting right now. The extreme feminist groups are holding an amazing vanguard. They're pushing the limits of patriarchy until they're starting to break. We're seeing this. This is nevertheless hand in hand with a wave of feminicidios. 2 weekends ago, the country was up in a roar because of the death of a young pregnant woman. There was a big sort of investigation about it. It was all over the news. And so the whole country mourned this amazing loss. But as we see over and over again, government is not on the side of the oppressed. Government is there to somehow protect their own interests, to protect their own capital. And this implies to continue to participate in patriarchal ways. And so us identified feminist men, we need to change our own ways. We need to feel the fear. We need to feel the vulnerability. We need to start exercising new ways to bond and be hand in hand with other vulnerable males, so that when we actually go out and interact with the feminine sphere, and I'm sorry to be binary and separate things, I know it's not that simple, but if you want to reproduce and have a partner and have children, then you need to negotiate justly with your partner. So anyway, in other words, writing for me has been a very important instrument to explore this deconstruction of my own masculinity. And so that's one of the ways that I've been able to use writing. I don't know if you have any questions about that.
No, just so there's nothing on the Cultural Gazette or like a publication about culture. I totally get your
Okay.
points about the masculinity in the columns and how you've used the writing, but I was looking to see if there was like a launch or an art journal, including the masculinity issues, of course. But obviously, you're onto so many other things right now that's not in the front burner, right? I take it.
Well, we did actually. I'm sorry, I veered into the subject because it's a very present day thing right now. We did put out 2 digital editions of reseñas. Basically, how would you translate that?
Reviews.
Reviews, exactly. We titled it La Brújula. And so we had 2 editions, and a third one was almost about to come out, but then the pandemic hit, and that really was because there was 0 funds. I was literally paying the writers from my pocket, you know. But we did produce almost 3 issues called La Brújula, the compass. And so my take on that was that we weren't going to focus on the metropolitan scene because that's usually where.
I love that you were going to go at large in other municipalities, Caguas, you know, whatever, go at large. So that I thought that was a very intelligent way of broadening the sphere and the discourse and of bringing new players into the arena. So yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, so we went to the north in Arecibo, Ponce in the south, Humacao in the east, Mayagüez in the west. We did Caguas, which is my hometown. It's kind of like in the center of the island. And of course, we covered San Juan. So basically, we were having anywhere from 5 to 6 different reviews of different art shows. Of, you know, like there was no criteria in terms of media. So we had anything from like fashion shows to like, you know, wine and drawing kind of, you know, experiences.
Like a drink and draw kind of thing.
Exactly. And actually, we have to pick up the third La Brújula edition because that was, so in the 3rd edition of La Brújula, we covered the earthquakes, which is something that should not get lost, you know. But now we need to sort of add a chapter with the pandemic. Now we need to, you know, maybe we'll be able to do it in the editorial part of the magazine. But I mean, yeah, we've had many different projects throughout the years, but to be honest, like these projects always fall, you know, they fall behind because of lack of funding. I mean, accessing funds is very hard. And so we do it because we need to. And periodically people will come up with a criticism column or a newspaper or, you know, something that would last, you know, maybe a couple of years tops, and then it falls because there's no institutional interest in having, I mean, the New York Times is as important as it is, not just because of its, you know, economic enclave, which is New York City, but also because of its longevity. You know, it's like the Paris Review, or, you know, things like this that are able to get to hold up the test of time. And so right now it's like we're always jump starting, you know, efforts. And usually, thank God that there's always new generations of youth behind us that will be like, what we need is a newspaper. And so they'll come up with the newspaper, you know, and that way, throughout the discontinuity of our history in Puerto Rico, if there's some investigation happening, which is part of my proposal in my thesis, you know, that our art history exists in these sort of isolated pockets, you know, that there's no real continuity. So you have to sort of like hilvanar, you have to like stitch together all these historic moments to actually be able to have continuous reading.
Yeah, well, longevity is a problem in our context, in the Caribbean, in our island in particular. And, you know, sometimes, you know, all the very exciting developments, you know, that we find or the tools that we look at elsewhere, meaning the United States, Europe, Asia, and Africa, which can be continental, right? Continental areas. Sometimes I wonder if, even though they bring incredible wealth of information and attitudes, sometimes I think they're diluting our own initiatives, which, because of the modesty of the Caribbean environment, sometimes are just immediately cast aside or destroyed or critiqued, so that longevity something that can stand there so that when you're a grandpa, that journal or something, but anyway, it could be that times are going faster. Ahí vamos. So I want to bring this quote, ahí vamos, because I want, before, you know, when we have these tertulias and interlocutors such as yourself get going, the time just evaporates. I don't know what happens. It's always like, wow. So here we are getting towards the tail end of this, and I cannot let this go by without referencing one of my favorite Quintín Rivera Toro pieces. And it's by now seminal, well-known, written about. I have it in the catalog. We're sharing it with you. And it's that Ahí Vamos photograph. Could you, as a parting shot, I always ask people like, oh, so what do you think about the pandemic? Or give us some words of hope. As a parting shot, if you would honor me, I would just like your take on Ahí Vamos, which is such a powerful piece from your production.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, as an artist, I'm sure you know that we make artworks and we don't know what the future will hold for them. Like, for some reason, this photograph, which was part of a series, just really sort of like became the home run of my art practice, you know. And I understand why, you know. It's the aesthetics of it are, I mean, of course, I've analyzed the picture over the years over and over again. It's basically, I mean, I'm hoping that we'll be able to share the image on the webcast, but it's basically the image of myself, you know, or a person. I am now, of course, more critical about it. It's not just a person. It is a white male, you know. It's like we can't avoid the fact that it's a white male. It's not a black male. It's not a white female, whatever. But anyway, it is an autobiography. It's a self-portrait, actually. That's the word. It's a self-portrait of myself inside of a pool. And so the effect of the composition is such that it feels like the swimmer is very calmly under a very deep place inside of a pool. So it actually gives you an emotion of gasping for air. So there's an illusionistic element to it because, you know, the photo shoot itself, which happened under a pool, was only part of it, because then I photoshopped the image so that the swimmer would look a lot smaller and augment the experience of like it looking like it was in the deep center of this humongous infinite pool. And also there's like these orthogonal perspective lines that make it even more dramatic. So in terms of composition, you know, it's very sort of like traditional, like Renaissance, like escape point of view. But it really has struck a chord in sort of like the psychology of the audience, which has seen it, because not only is the blue of the picture itself very beautiful, you know, of course that is a phenomenological aspect of, you know, looking at water, looking at a pool or an ocean, etc. It's just like a very beautiful blue. But then again, you know, that idea that in life we are transiting from point A to point B, you know, that's sort of like the central idea of this whole series. Like, there's a whole series of these photographs, and they're always like, it is a self-portrait of me in transit in the center of this trajectory of a landscape. And so, yeah, I've been lucky enough to have had this photograph commissioned and reviewed and collected. And so, yeah, so it is certainly kind of like a memorable piece of my art production.
It's outstanding. I like it very much, and I'm sure some of the people looking at it right now will also, you know, enjoy that sort of worldview. There is a worldview in there, and anyway, yeah. So as we're almost ready to wrap, but I remember who's of that amazing roster of artists that we are extremely proud to bring into the Clemente, thanks to your curatorial, you know, thing. Who invited you? Alba Muses, Libertad Guerra. Who have you been working with?
Well, I mean, it was an open call, so
Oh, I see. Yes.
To be honest, I have to be very thankful to Libertad Guerra, who, same as you, I've heard for many years and never had the pleasure of meeting. But Libertad has been nothing but supportive and warm and welcoming and sort of like motivating. So I'm very thankful to be working with you guys. Regarding the artists in the show, I actually forgot to mention that Chemi Rosado Sejo, which is probably the biggest hitter in the whole roster, is part of the show. And then Vanessa Hernandez Gracia is also part of the show.
But will they be coming? Will some of them join you when you travel? Can some of them? I know it's a hardship. We don't have money to offer like that, like a ticket, which I'm hoping someday later in Libertad's tenure we can get to that. And I'm sure she's working at it, day and night. But I just wonder, on this particular iteration with your show, is anybody else joining you? So are the people that are listening know who to look for if they do show up?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the one idea that we had to bring was Vanessa Hernandez Gracia, so she could do a performance, like a live performance.
Right.
But because of funds, she's not going to be able to visit. But anyway, I'm sure they'll all be there in spirit. I wanted to take the chance, take this moment to unveil some of the artwork that is going to be shown. These artworks are just gorgeous beauties from Monica Rodriguez. These are CNC made weapons. This is a Colt. And then we have a 9mm, okay? All wood sculptures made with a CNC router. And these are the weapons that, sort of like sadly, some of the Puerto Rican nationalists intended to overthrow the government. Something as humble as this knife were part of the collection of 5 weapons. I'm saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weapons that were used to try and overthrow a government. So
you mean in the 50s? You mean Hayuya? You're talking Hayuya, the nationalist uprising?
Yes, the National Revolt. So no, but I actually mean the when they tried to enter the Fortaleza, el Palacio de Santa Catalina.
Okay, our local government. Okay, yes.
It was a suicide mission. Yeah, no, I'm speaking in Puerto Rico. But anyway, so these artworks will be shown. It's a very sort of like deep charged group of artworks. You'll see that some of them will have humor and some of them are in all seriousness. Very intense artworks. So yeah, so Monica, Chemi, Miritza, Danny, Carlo. I mean, I'm very grateful for this group of artists to have agreed to work with me because it took me 4 years to write this thesis. It meant that I had continuous conversations with them over a period of 4 years, and now this is the conclusion. I'm very excited and thankful about the fact that I am able to kind of go full circle in El Clemente in New York, where I grew up as a 19-year-old until I was, in my mid-20s, and come back and share this with you.
Well, I just want to then thank you. And as a conclusion, I want to remind everyone that Quintín has some amazing, Quintín Rivera Toro, Dr. Quintín Rivera Toro has some amazing work at Governor's Island that you should all check out because it's also going to be glorious out there, beautiful, nice outing, the artwork, the vibe as the world, or at least New York, starts coming back. Also, that you can join Quintín Rivera Toro, the curator, and Libertad Guerra, the director here at the Clemente. Hopefully yours truly on the 28th of this month, right? On the 28th of this month of May, we're going to have the llamas, La Cultura en Llamas, and Quintín Rivera Toro is going to set the Abrazo Interno Gallery in flames. Gracias, Quintín. I look forward to the show.
Thank you, Miguel.